I'm just going to pause here at the introductory slide just for a second, because it seems to me a little bit like an audacious claim, right? 3 ways to use advanced data to grow your business in 2022. I feel like this year behind us, and as we turn the page to 2022, we're at an exceptional opportunity. And honestly, new technology being the game changer. It's the technology that we're going to talk about today that we think can really, really make the difference for wineries between last year and any previous year that they've had before, honestly, and what is possible in 2022. We're going to talk today about some fancy sort of technology, some fancy language, machine learning, artificial intelligence, that kind of thing. But what I really hope that you'll take away from by the end is that we don't need you to know how to do any of that. We will take care of that on the back end. That's sort of the ace up our sleeve of Enolytics. What we need you to do is to reap the benefits of it. This webinar is oriented toward actionable takeaways around the concept of using advanced data and advanced tools to grow your business. So the 3 areas for today's focus is to identify wine club members at risk, segmenting your data, and also looking at developing customer personas. And we are going to extrapolate a little bit and also make these actionable to everyone. And we are especially going to share the screen, share the stage with 2 guest presenters who are actively using the system and who are going to speak to those three areas specifically. So let me start a little bit with this quote that I love from Samuel Taylor Coleridge: "Water, water everywhere, nor not a drop to drink." And that's also the same when it comes to data. Data everywhere, not a drop to use or not a drop to utilize. So that's actually the big motivation for the founding of the company, was that we saw lots of data everywhere throughout the wine and spirits industry. But what we thought was an opportunity from an entrepreneurial perspective was the analysis of that data. So that is what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today, but this will be familiar to you. These are screen shares, screenshots from Commerce7, where some of the data exists, some of the data out there, especially in the e-commerce space. So taking all of that data and then actually applying it in a way that is actionable and usable to every day. We need guideposts. We need a direction. We need a way to navigate through the mountains and the gold mine. Really, that is data. So one of the things that we're excited to share with you today, for the first time that we are announcing publicly, is that Enolytics is the analytics partner on the 2022 Silicon Valley Bank Annual State of the Wine Industry Report. So there is a question, and if you're familiar with Rob McMillan's work with the State of the Industry Report, you will recognize that question 15 is whether you have an employee assigned to regularly analyze your winery's customer data. So back in 2018, the answer was yes, we do, for 33% of the wineries who responded. 67% said no. And you could see that now, sort of leading up to today, that number has reversed. So you are in the perfect seats, front row seats for this transformation for the industry that we are also very honored and thrilled to be part of. So moving on to why data is so important. So let's ask our hosts. So why data is so important is a topic that Commerce7 is very proactively putting out there yourselves. And we wanted to sort of take a moment and recognize some of the statistics that you put out in a webinar with WinePulse and Remy last week. So you had said at the time for the average number of orders before a member joins a club, 24%, people whose email was captured in the tasting room to make an online purchase, 14% only is the likelihood that people whose email is captured in the tasting room will join the wine club at a later date. However, 77%, and the yikes on the screen is totally my editorial sort of input there. 77% of all tasting room orders do not have a customer record. So that's a problem because of this screen. So tasting room records linked to customer data. So let's say that you've got side by side $100 spent in two different tasting rooms. So $100 spent in a tasting room where let's say 5% of tasting room records were or data about the customer was captured in that tasting room. That person will spend just $18 online subsequent to leaving the tasting room and buying wine online, as opposed to when the customer data is captured in the tasting room, $78 will come back to the winery through online purchases. So that is a tremendous difference. And which would you rather have, the $18 or the $78? Let me sort of pause here for a second and talk just for a moment about the do-it-yourself tips when it comes to data collection. This is sort of the wish list that we look for when we're looking at customer data. Contact details like phone and email address, geographic data like zip code, date of birth, sales associate, who in the room actually made that sale, and the reason for leaving the club. So there are specific reasons why that list of data is so important to capture. And let me actually turn to our first of the 3 points we wanted to cover today, which speaks to identifying wine club members at risk, because those pieces of data that I just articulated on the previous slide are what drives directly the analysis, again, the machine learning that's happening behind the scenes, in order to enable us to identify wine club members who are at risk of leaving the club, that churn rate number. Those pieces of data, those 6 or 7 pieces of data, the date of birth, first name, last name, geography, and also purchasing history, are what enable us to write the algorithm that happens behind the scenes in order for people like Michael Longrobim at Dry Creek Vineyard to identify wine club members at risk. It's all about retaining the customer number. And this is just a brief statistic. Increase customer retention rate by only 5%, and your profits go up between 25 and 95%. That's huge, obviously, and a tremendous opportunity for tasting room sales associates and wineries themselves to calculate. So how do we know who is at risk? So Michael, I'm going to hand it over to you for the next couple slides to talk about this topic specifically.
Okay, Kathy, just to underscore what you're saying there, the small percentages over time can make a huge difference. So I think most wineries who are getting into the use of data for predictive analysis, I think starting small is key. Don't get overwhelmed. It's easy to get overwhelmed. Start small and see how it does. Start with a small percentage, see how it impacts your sales. So and point number one, data needs to be part of the conversation. So much of the wine industry decision-making that I've seen is based on relationship. What's my friend, my colleague in the winery down the street, what are they doing? Or I've seen this winery doing that. Well, let's try it that way. And those kind of conversations are important, and we will continue to need those. I'm suggesting let's add data to the conversation. Kathy already talked about using data to predict club attrition. Things like predictive analysis. It sounds intimidating. It's not. And at point 3, choosing quality over quantity. Again, start small. Pick a segment of your wine club and try to predict when they're going to leave. You decide what segment's most important.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. As we were preparing for this webinar, the fact that data needs to be part of the conversation was one of the most important things that you kept underscoring. It's not the only thing you need to consider, but it's definitely one of the things that you need to consider. And I think that conversation is happening more and more often. So let's scoot ahead here a little bit. And Michael, the likelihood of leaving, it varies depending on the club, right? It isn't just one percentage of churn rate for your entire club, your club ecosystem. Every club has its own churn rate.
Absolutely, and there's a lot going on this slide. What I want to underscore here is most retention efforts, club retention efforts I've seen focus on the club as a whole. I think this slide does a really good job of saying you can segment. The Enolytics red, the Zen rocks, the blend levers. This is, the predictive analysis is going to be different for each club. Each club in each state, in each income range, there's a couple different variables that can be thrown in for that predictive analysis. Don't just look at the club as a whole, dial in a little further. Does that make sense?
Right. The ability to say, yes, the churn rate for this club is different than the churn rate from that club. And as a matter of fact, the churn rate for this club within the Pacific Northwest is different than the churn rate for the same club in the Southeast.
Which leads us to our next slide. Good transition there. So you'll hear the term multivariate analysis. That's just a fancy way of saying, look at all the data that is used to predict when someone's going to leave the club. Obviously, time as club member is a huge factor to predict when someone's going to leave. We've all heard the industry statistic of, well, the average club member stays 18 months. That's pretty misleading. How expensive is the club? How many bottles per year? That kind of thing. So obviously the buying behavior, gender, age, and affluence can all have an impact on when someone's going to leave the club and why they left, and customer specific metrics.
Yeah, Michael, the 18-month sort of metric is true in some cases, but our point here is that it's not true in all cases. Exactly. And the idea is to look and to segment, and Janie will talk about this a little bit in just a minute, but to segment this club out relative to any of the other clubs according to some of these factors. To Michael's point of all of that math, all those calculations are happening behind the scenes. Being able to segment out the different clubs, being able to segment out the different purchasing behavior, those are all examples and illustrations of the machine learning that's happening behind the scenes in order to use past customer behavior to predict future customer behavior. So that's the cool takeaway. That's what the wineries need to know. That's what you as winery professionals need to put into play. You don't need to understand the math. We've got that part behind the scenes. That's the machine learning part. What we want you to do is to reap the benefits of that machine learning. So Michael, does this look familiar to you? Thousands and thousands of rows of data.
This looks very familiar, yes.
So maybe you can find the patterns, but most people can't in thousands and thousands of rows of data. And could you even more so do it on a regular basis and do it consistently? No. So here we've dropped in this quick 12-second video in order to show you how easy it is to identify the club members at risk. So I'm actually going to replay it because what we're showing you here is this is the interactive dashboard with all of the data from Dry Creek, from Brooks, for example, built in. So all of the data is there. All of the historical purchasing data is there. So here you could literally choose kind of one segment at a time, people at high or very high risk of leaving. Now you've segmented that out and you're presented with this table of people, literally your people, your own customers who are at high and very high risk of leaving. So you've got their name, you've got their club they belong to, their contact email, their phone number, the likelihood of leaving, how long they've been with you, how much they've spent, and also some of the ways that we enhance the data, like do they belong to Gen X? What age are they? Are they probably male or female? What area of affluence do they live in, according to the US Census data, which determines that by zip code? And then further down, if I could scroll to the right here, you'd also see the RFM analysis, how recently, how frequently, and how much did they spend. So this is an illustration of how granular you can get with your data. And this is, we've just started looking here at wine club members at risk within the wine club, but there's really quite a lot more that can be done. And that is happening behind the scenes when it comes to machine learning. Michael, let me just invite you to talk a little bit more about this slide as well.
I would say take a look at your list of canceled club members. Is there an opportunity, and use data analysis to further segment that list? Is there an opportunity to invite back some of your canceled members, particularly if you made changes to your club? There's a lot of new club options out there right now. There's a great opportunity to invite back some of your canceled club members, and identifying club-like members. This is creating a model. What does your current club member look like? Or what does your California current club member look like? And what's your Texas club member look like? Creating a model, and then using that model and using it to go out and find additional club members, targeting your efforts.
Right, it's the quality over quantity that you mentioned and sort of the Michael's expert tips at the beginning. So again, this it's all about the retention, which is what the churn rate analysis and the attrition functionality is about within the system that is available to Commerce7 users. It's that doing just 5% better increases your profits by that much, 25 to 95%. Let's transition to the second part, and let me invite Janie Hook from Brooks Winery up to kind of co-present with me on this. Janie's the managing director at Brooks Winery, award-winning winery in Oregon. So Janie, welcome and thank you for being here. And I wanted to invite you to talk about segmentation specifically. This is the second of the third main part that we wanted to cover today. Some expert tips that you've got on segmentation.
Well, I don't know if I'm an expert, but thank you for having me here. A couple things that we hear about segmentation all the time in the wine industry, and you need to be segmenting your data. And there really aren't very many tools that I've come across that allow you to do it more beyond geography, beyond potentially age, if you have the data, maybe some purchase history. But what I love about the analytic system is that it's so complex in terms of the different things you can look at, so that you really can have a conversation with the right audience if you select them correctly and get down to that level of detail. And one of the things that's super important is timeliness. You want to have that conversation at the right time. I kick myself a little bit because I look at all my new customers that have started or bought from Brooks since COVID happened, right? We all gained a ton of new customers that never knew our brand before. And having a timely conversation with them when they make that first purchase is super important versus waiting until now. Now that I have that data in a much more readily available format, timeliness makes all the difference in terms of when you're talking to your customer, for sure. What stage of their journey are they at? Have they been to your website? Have they left something in their cart and never made a purchase? Have they bought from you those 4 times before, put in those 4 orders, but they're not a club member yet? Like really understanding where they are in their journey with your brand from a purchasing behavior is really important. That's a different conversation with somebody that maybe has purchased 4 orders and would be ready to join the club than someone who's abandoned their cart and they've never purchased from you before at all. So really being able to segment and look at where they are in their journey is really important. And then keeping things personable. This is kind of something that's super important to me as a brand, and something that I think is important when you are segmenting, that you acknowledge and recognize and meet that person where they're at, whether it's what part of the country they're in, how long they've been in your wine club, but being able to not be transactional and be personable. And you really only can do that if you've segmented your data down to look at specific characteristics of your customers.
Yeah, Janie, thank you so much. And as a recipient of Brooks's emails that arrive every weekend, it's definitely something that stands out for Brooks as a brand, for sure. I love these expert tips. And so much of what you're seeing and so much of the Enolytics system is responsive to Jamie's feedback, to Michael's feedback, to user feedback that we have had in the past 18 months as we've been developing the system. So Janie, the further sort of data segmentation tips, we can tag team on this, but is there anything that you would like to speak to specifically on this slide, collecting as much as you can? What's been your experience on that or any of these other tips?
You know, the collecting as much as you can has been a hot button for me ever since I've been at Brooks for the last 17 years, because I know that if I don't have a way to contact that customer after they walk out of my tasting room, you know, it's so much more expensive to acquire a new customer than to be able to communicate and retain them. And I literally, like, I'll look at Commerce7, and if I see a blank name on an order in the tasting room, I'll look that up and see who it is, sales associate wise, and say, hey, you're forgetting to, you know, put in this information, and it's super, super important. But you have to keep that conversation going to collect as much information as you can. And I think if the team approaches things appropriately in the tasting room, people are willing to give their data. If they have a good experience, they don't mind that they're going to give you their data.
It's also important to notice that the loop here, collecting as much as you can in the data room, in the tasting room, feeds directly into the algorithms that we use to help sort of behind the scenes identify the people who want to be communicated with in a certain way, or who help to, it personalizes the data. And that point of access, that point of collection of the personal data at the beginning is so important because it feeds that loop. It gets that wheel going.
One of the things that I love too is you have to have accuracy in your data as well. And it's so easy on your system to quickly identify where your data is not accurate. So just having data alone isn't great unless you know that it's actually accurate data. So I love the way that we can segment, back to segmentation, people who we don't have a valid date of birth on. And I can email those people and try to fix their dates of birth. It's just one example.
Right. And also further enhancing the data where you can, knowing the birth date, or if the birth date is wrong, or being able to identify it, which is part of the data cleansing process. That's again the part of the technology behind the scenes, is that we point that out. So that literally gives you a kind of tools and ammunition to say, hey, I'm going to reach out to that person and say, hey, your accurate date of birth really means something to us. And can you help us sort of rectify the situation? So what the other thing it does is enhance the data where you can. And so although it's valuable to know the birth date, it's also super valuable to know the generation that person then belongs to, which is one of the ways that we enhance the data, so that you know if you're talking to a millennial versus a boomer or versus Gen Z.
Yeah, those are very different conversations.
Totally. And then the fresh data is updated overnight, and the automation's built in. Great. In the interest of time, I just want to move on and provide a couple of do-it-yourself ideas about using segmentation. Janie, you've added a couple to this list. Would you like to sort of focus on any of them?
Sure. I mean, we utilize a lot. We have over 60 different wines. So we have a wide band in terms of what different consumers like. And so being able to use the data to identify people who have maybe bought a specific label in the past when we're releasing the next vintage, just to talk to them. Same thing with people who like sparkling. We just did a sparkling release, and we were able to reach out to just the people who have bought our bubbles, because maybe, you know, the person who only buys Pinot Noir maybe doesn't want to know about our new Muscat bubbles. So there's a lot of ways to use the data from a product standpoint in terms of targeting specific labels or varietals or sales. There's a lot of other things on here too. I don't know, Kathy, if you want to talk about them. Those are my favorites.
Yeah, for sure. The top customers being able to segment geographically, if you've got like a last minute sale going on and it's a curbside pickup only opportunity, you know, sort of generates that kind of interest. But let me segment and let me email only those people who live within driving distance and easy drive of the winery. The RFN segmentation is a very robust part of the system. Gifting on a regular basis, 'tis the season, right? 'Tis the season for gifters.
Yeah, and we just used that, Kathy, actually. And, you know, a couple of the people on that list had already reached out to us, but a few of them hadn't. And so we've already captured those sales. by using the list in the report that you guys generate.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you, Janie. And then online customers who bought maybe this product, maybe your Riesling, but not your Pinot, or vice versa. And maybe you want to offer a special, create a special offer to those people. Also, customers, club members who also bought online, and customers who bought, this is an exciting report we're generating right now around customers who bought on Black Friday. Anything else you want to add to that slide, Janie?
No, it's just I love the comment about using your imagination too, because everybody has such different priorities. And there's just so many options with the power of the system to be able to segment different ways.
Right. Thank you, Janie. What in the movie that you're seeing right now is the advanced reporting module. So we're showing you, and Janie mentioned the gifting option. This is how she would have created that list. So this is the reporting module, and you can see that we're making different selections. The red and the pink tabs at the top are how we're segmenting. And it's really just this easy to segment your list to say, okay, so show me my contact first name and last name and email. How much have they spent with us over a particular period of time? There's the date picker in the upper left there. And then you're going to say, okay, so these are literally the people who fulfill all of these criteria. And it took less than a minute. And so this report happens to be male boomers who bought gifts this year online. And that sort of target, very robust, very specific list is able to be created in a minute. So again, just to reiterate the point, you don't have to know how machine learning works, but you as the user, you get to reap the benefits of it on the other side. So just a few other examples of how machine learning is put into use throughout the system is in forecasting. Janie as a general manager, Michael as somebody who is reporting to the CFO at Dry Creek. The forecasting tool is built into the system so that you can say, like, based on historical information, historical data, the shaded area is how things are looking. You're anticipating these kind of sales, or you can segment by demand in your tasting room, or you can segment by varietal, how much Zinfandel, how much Riesling. You can anticipate moving forward. So that is one of the other applications of machine learning. And then there's also a virtual analyst built into the system too, to sort of highlight what you need to be paying attention to, where you're doing awesome, where you're doing kind of so-so, and where you need to pay attention because things have gotten a little bit worrisome.
And you can set better realistic goals too. I looked at my club member forecast for next year, and it made me think, okay, well, I probably would have thrown a number half that, or twice that, but it really helps to help set goals too.
So Janie, customer personas, I'm so excited to go into this with you. Customer personas is the last of the three areas that we wanted to talk about today. So looking at who is your core customer, this goes into how we enhance the data in order to help flesh out literally who your core customers are, not some hypothetical persona, not some kind of R&D effort from sort of an external marketing department or marketing program or agency, but really your customers. Who are they? So here we're looking at a couple of the ways that we enhance the data. We run an algorithm according to gender to identify the first name. Janie is probably female, Michael is probably male, Chris could be one or the other. So that if you're talking to someone who's probably female or male, do they belong to Gen X or Gen Z, or is an unknown birth date? To Janie's point earlier, like identify and clean up that data so that that birth date gets rectified. And then where do they live? Do they live in an affluent area? Do they live in a middle class area? Do they live in a poor area? So those are some of the ways that it's possible to flesh out the persona of your customer.
And that's so important, Kathy, too, because like we're working with a new marketing agency about building our club outside of the tasting room. Like, how can we make our club attractive to people maybe who have never stepped foot in our tasting room? And the first things they asked me was about generation and gender. And I didn't have that data before I had your system. And so it really, there's a different conversation, especially by generation, that you want to be having with people, and to understand that.
Yeah, thank you. So a couple personas, Janie. So I love this part because of being able to customize your messaging to your actual core customer persona, like for Rosé or Riesling, or those in Chicago, or those who who live in an affluent zip code, or maybe who are female. And then very generously, you've allowed us to run and show this kind of analysis for your customer specifically. Do you want to kind of talk us through this part, Janie?
Yeah, it's so interesting to me too, to see this analysis and to see the differences that all of my male consumers apparently love Pinot Noir. Where are their bubbles? Where is their rosé? And that the females brought in those bubbles and the sweet pea, and really kind of the higher price points of the Pinot Noirs.
Yeah, it's so cool. And then to Michael's point earlier, being able to keep drilling down. So not only male versus female, but male boomers versus, for example, versus female millennials. And that list, again, is completely different.
Yeah, those are totally different.
So then and your team knows how to create the message that goes to those people specifically. Yeah, I love this visualization, Janie. Thank you for letting us do that and sort of show it here in the webinar. Anything here to talk about, Janie, in terms of your communication and how it varies according to the persona? We've mentioned you speak differently to different ages, or different genders, or different locations.
Yeah, and there's a different reception when you're talking to boomers. They're used to things more transactional, where your millennials, they want to know why you're relevant and what you're doing to help the earth. And, they have different value systems across those different generations. So being able, and where they live in the country, being able to talk to just those people with the right conversation about what they care about is really important. So that segmentation piece for the personas makes a big difference in terms of the conversation that you're going to have.
Also, in terms of timing your outreach too, but seasonally, is it springtime where your people are living, or this group is living, or is it the dead of winter? Yeah. So
even to add to that, which channel you would choose, right? So a millennial might respond well to social, whereas a boomer might respond well to an email message.
Yeah, totally right. Totally right, Jake. Thank you. A couple more slides. We think that it's about expanding the reach. So we spent a good portion of the time talking about retaining customers, and Michael's pieces and his points around retaining wine club members through looking at attrition rate and making data part of the conversation, and focusing on the quality of the outreach and the quality of the prospect as opposed to the quantity. And then segueing into the segmentation and also creating the customer personas. The expansion of the reach, we think, can be achieved through the enhancing of the data in order to understand better your own customers. And by expanding the reach, we do mean so that you get a better sense of who your people are, but also fishing within your own pond. The people who are your wine club, and then the people who have bought from you or are in your contact list, more generally. Janie said how much more expensive it is to acquire new members as opposed to continue to marketing to the ones that you currently have. Yeah, so a couple of the key takeaways. I don't need to read these to you. I basically just summarized them anyway. But I want to underscore the value of data and using the data, and why we think that this technology and this machine learning is the game changer heading into 2022. And why we want more wineries using it, because that data is gold. And we, our point here in this webinar and in developing this technology is for you to use it and mine it and benefit from it as much as you can. All right, let me step into today's special offers that we wanted to make to Commerce7 customers. We wanted to offer a 10% discount on an annual subscription to the Enolytics platform, which sits on top of Commerce7. So basically the data we would establish, we would pull the data through an API from Commerce7 into the winery's private portal that you would access through a username and a login. So that's based on an annual subscription. It happens every 24 hours. So you would get updates, and the dashboard would be refreshed every 24 hours. We're offering a 30-day money-back guarantee. Try it out. If you're not happy with it, no questions. We'll just step back out of the frame, so to speak. There's no setup fee. We're waiving the setup fee, I should say. We have a very robust support portal, and we also are adding additional free and unlimited master classes to Commerce7 customers in order to get very familiar with the system and to get the most out of it. We realize that there's a learning curve, what you can do with the system. So we want to provide the support so that you're successful through the system. And then the first 5 customers are invited to join a Commerce7 specific advisory board so that we deliver the most value specifically to Commerce7 customers. I also wanted to put up some options here to be in touch afterwards, scheduling a demo. We'll drop a PDF into the chat box in order for you to download the brochure, and there's my contact information.